Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video of myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. It's not quite breaking news anymore. I've reported this morning in my first video, second video of the day. This concerns the Storm Shadow cruise missile that's been very effective for the Ukrainians, the British-made Storm Shadow missile. That news is out that the British have given another batch of these missiles. Some say a relatively large batch. I've seen that phraseology in a few sources, but I've not seen it from the initial source, which appears to be a Bloomberg article. And it's undisclosed how many have been given, but this is really significant for a number of reasons. First and foremost, that Ukraine needs them, definitely needs them. So let's get into some of the claims. So here we have good news. The United Kingdom has delivered a new batch of Storm Shadow cruise missiles to Ukraine. Delivery is made ahead of the onset of winter to ensure that Ukraine has additional means to respond to intensified attacks on civilian infrastructure by Russia. The operational range of these missiles is 300 kilometers for the export versions, says NSTRIKE. Well, the Bloomberg article from which this is lifted talks about the range being more than 250 kilometers. It says here the UK government recently resupplied, so the idea is that they are already there, Ukraine with more Storm Shadow cruise missiles to enable Kyiv to continue its campaign of long-range strikes inside Russia. People familiar with the matter said the delivery of an unspecified number of missiles was made to ensure Ukraine is stocked ahead of the winter months, during which Britain is concerned that the Kremlin will step up attacks on Ukrainian civilians, according to the people who spoke anonymously about matters that haven't been made public. As Russia increasingly struggles under the weight of sanctions, the UK and its allies are trying to show Putin that Western support for Ukraine will outlast the ability for the Russian economy to sustain its war effort. The British move comes as US President Trump ruled out sending Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. Storm Shadows have helped Zelensky's administration target vulnerabilities in Russia. In October, Ukraine's military said it hit a Russian chemical plant with the UK-made long-range weapon. Quote, a massive combined missile and airstrike was carried out, including the use of air-launched Storm Shadow missiles, which successfully penetrated the Russian air defense system, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine posted on social media. That was the first confirmed use of the Storm Shadow missile outside Russia since President Donald Trump returned to the White House. Storm Shadows are precision-guided air-launched missiles with a range of more than 250 kilometers. They fly close to the terrain at high speeds using a combination of so-called inertial navigation with global positioning system, GPS, and terrain reference navigation, according to a fact sheet on the website of their manufacturer. The UK government hasn't said how many Storm Shadow missiles it has given Ukraine during the war and doesn't regularly announce transfers. So the way I understand Storm Shadows is, they use those methods of traveling close to the ground, and like any cruise missile, and then as it gets closer, I think its nose comes off and it can use terrain mapping, just in case there's lots of interference close to the target, and then goes and hits down. It has a broach warhead, so it's a two-stage warhead, so it can be a bunker buster, so it can explode the outside of a bunker or the ground, and then a second detonation from the proper warhead, then subsequently takes place. So it's a very useful bit of kit for hitting a variety of targets. Last week, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer said the prospects for Ukraine were improving after Trump imposed sanctions on Russian oil, a sign of Kiev's allies are more cautiously optimistic that a hardening US stance could damage a Kremlin ability to sustain its war. We're in a better place, Starmer told Bloomberg in an interview, hailing US sanctions on Russian oil majors as significant developments. But yeah, they first fired these against Russia in November last year, inside Russia, rather than say at Crimea, where they'd been used previously to take out like the Chonhar Bridge and other places. And that came after the US, and this is a significant element of this, by the way, continues to be, after the US said that Ukraine could fire ATACMS inside Russia, and that was a response to North Korean soldiers being used by Russia in Kursk. Okay, so what this also tells us then, and this is what Michael Weiss and others have said, is that Grinkovich, who's the American NATO commander in Europe, is gearing up for more hits. Quote, the UK government recently resupplied Ukraine with more Storm Shadow, blah, blah, blah. So that's what we know. So this suggests that Saka is on board with Storm Shadows being used inside Russia, and it's not a problem for the Americans, essentially. So that's really good news. Now, the Storm Shadow if it is the export variant, the Black Shaheen variant, then that has a 290-kilometer range, reportedly. That's to keep down exports of missiles that can go over certain, 300 kilometers, I think it is, to stop countries being able to do X, Y, and Z, and just stops everyone having access to all the longest range missiles. But it's not 100% clear that the UK would provide Ukraine with the export variant here. I mean, it could be that they have the ability to fire these long further distance, but that could also be a risk if the UK did that. So I'm not 100% sure. Otherwise they would have an operational range of 550 kilometers, which is obviously a lot better. They could be fired from the Su-24. That's generally what the Ukrainians are using at the moment, but also the Mirage 2000s. Because of course they fire the French version, which is the Scalp, and then Rafales and Gripens, useful because that's what the Ukrainians are going to be receiving. Now, there was all this talk about whether the British and French are still making the Storm Shadows or Scalps. And actually just AI, this is an AI answer, but with reference to the right-hand side here, including the UK government. UK, and I asked it whether Storm Shadow production has restarted. The UK and France announced plans to restart production of the Storm Shadow and Scalp cruise missiles in July of this year to replenish stockpiles depleted by transfers to Ukraine. This new contract with manufacturer MBDA involves updating existing production lines and is part of a broader joint project to develop the next generation deep strike missile system. So MBDA has restarted production of the current generation Storm Shadow Scalp missiles after a 15-year hiatus. So 15 years of not making it. And we were all wondering whether they are, and I had forgotten, I report so much I couldn't quite remember whether they had definitely restarted them. Production lines are also being upgraded. It's a joint project and is linked to a new Anglo-French agreement to jointly develop a new generation of deep strike and anti-ship missiles, which will eventually replace the Storm Shadow, replenishing the stockpiles, but also potential for Ukraine, it says here, and that seems to be what's taking place. And this is obviously very good, and like I often tell you, it's also good for jobs as well. So there are many reasons why this might be seen as a good idea, but primarily Ukraine really bloody needs them. The cost of these, I wonder if it has it. Yeah, they are not cheap. £2 million, right? That's $2.5 million a pop. Now I don't know whether that's financial year 2023. I don't know whether they'll be more expensive because they're revamping or restarting the production line, or whether they can make them more cheaply, because when you look at things like the FP2 drone, that's $55,000. Like, how many FP2 drones with 105 kilogram warhead, 200 kilometer range, so maybe the FP1 is kind of, how many FP1s can you get? So let's look at the cost of the FP1 drone, which can go much further, but it has a smaller warhead. Cost of FP1 drone, and here we say approximately $55,000 to $75,000 range. So goodness me, you can fit an awful lot of those into $2.5 million. So there is a trade-off here of cost, but if the cost is being borne out by the British and French rather than the Ukrainians, then that's less of a concern to them. But in all honesty, they want to be using FP1s where they can, and use the Storm Shadows for particular strikes where they need that broach warhead, where they need that ability to maybe get through air defenses even more successfully. So anyway, that's really good news for Ukraine. A bit more meat on the bone for the claims concerning the Storm Shadow missiles going to Ukraine. They appear to already have gone, and this is a sign that they really have restarted the manufacturing and that they are consistently getting those to Ukraine. I think Zelensky said something the other day that was something like, we send a normal amount of Storm Shadow cruise missiles. He said something along those lines, which basically intimated that we regularly send Storm Shadow drones because one presumes we regularly receive them. In other words, this is really good news for Ukraine, that they, I would imagine, are regularly receiving Storm Shadows and or Scalp cruise missiles, and they will desperately need as many of these as they can get, as I've said. Okay, that's enough from me. Take care. Speak to you soon.